this is clearly, you'll see this is not a very slide-heavy presentation, and this is not a great room for trying to have a conversation with 10 people scattered around, but we'll do our best. I don't know how this works, so I'll just press buttons when I need to move slides forward. Is that okay? And may or may not work. So, as I say, it's not slide heavy, and there'll be time for questions at the end, but given the number of people here and the subject matter, if anybody has a question, I'd rather interrupt as we go along. The purpose for me of this session is to talk about my experiences of aligning audit activity to key business objectives and strategy. It isn't a user guide for how to do it. I'll talk a little bit about how I've tried to do this at a number of organisations, where it's been successful, where it hasn't, things that work, things that don't work. And particularly, a lot of what I'll talk about today is how I'm approaching this topic at the moment within the cooperative bank. And so it's very, from my perspective, we're very focused on UK financial services, but hopefully we can extrapolate that into other industries, other services, which I'm sure there's lots of relevance across. I'll also pick and use examples from across my experience with other organisations. And so I appreciate there was already a bit of an introduction. Hey, it does work. If anybody can read this, they've clearly got better eyesight than I have. I trust there's not a huge amount of content on the slides, and there's not a lot that I won't talk to as we go through it. So from my perspective, I've started internal audit with Ernst & Young back in the 90s as a internal audit co-source outsourcer, and then moved through financial services organisations, including MBNA into Bank of America, into Barclays, USS, which is a superannuation scheme, and then into Cooperative Bank. Throughout those organisations I've worked, there has always been an overarching challenge to how do you ensure that the audit work that you do is aligned to the business strategy, because it's an intrinsic part of how do you demonstrate you're adding value into the organisation. So one of the things that I thought we were talking about is why bother, and the why bother has two aspects to it. There's a why bother to say you're doing it, and the answer to that is there's an expectation that internal auditors are doing it, but why bother in terms of the impact for the organisation? So if you get this right, if an audit team truly does align their audit work to the business objectives, it can improve the business. It improves the clarity of the objectives for the business, improves the execution of the business strategy, and it improves the communication around that strategy across the organisation. The other things for me that have come out of the value from working through this process is really improves the credibility of the audit team. If an audit team understand the strategy as an extension of understanding how the business works, they're better at their jobs, they're better at delivering audit work, they land better messages. It improves the quality of the audit reports that they write. It makes it easier to land those audit reports within the organisation. And increasingly we're seeing now it makes it a more interesting and rewarding career for those auditors. They feel internal audits, and I'm sure this isn't just within financial services in the north of England, has a bit of a PR job. It is difficult to attract good quality internal audit candidates, and you need to encourage them and entice them into an organisation with the value that they can bring to that organisation, but the value you can bring to them in terms of their career. I think what we found by really working at improving the alignment of the audit function to the business is they have better conversations, they have better career opportunities, they have better opportunities within the organisation, they have the better CVs for when they leave the organisation. It also helps from attraction for us, from attracting good candidates in the business to come and spend time with the internal audit function. It's in as less of a tick-boxing compliance type role because they can see the impact it's having. But that, it says, is not just by putting it on the audit plan and ticking a box to say, do you align your audit plan to the business? So we'll talk a little bit about the process that we're trying to get through to get to that point. So the next point I was going to talk to is around the environment that we need to operate in. So to do the alignments, there are 4 building blocks that are required. And working these rounds, so from a business perspective, the business need to buy into the internal audit function as an adder of value generally. They need to buy into the audit function as somebody that has a voice as part of the business strategy and as part of delivery of the business objectives. To do that, the business needs to be clear about business objectives and clear about strategy. I've worked in a number of organisations where clarity of that strategy is felt that it's there at the top, but as you scratch the surface, it isn't immediately clear. It isn't obvious about how they're going to achieve that strategy. It's not clear about how they're going to manage the dependencies and assumptions underlying that strategy. And those are things that, for an audit team to be able to hook into, need better articulation. So one of the things that a number of audit functions do, and we've tried to do, is almost audit that strategy and the strategy setting process in the first place. Is it clear? Is it achievable? Is it realistic? Is it bedded in? Is it understood across the organisation? And that in itself drives value to the audit team and to the business. Another part of the environment that's important in landing this is around having really good access into that business, into the executive team, into the teams below that executive team, because part of what audit are doing through this process is triangulating what they're seeing and what they're hearing top down, but also bottom up. So where are their disconnects and how can they identify those disconnects, but with an understanding of what the business are trying to achieve. And talk about the board and audit committee, again, working in a number of organisations, if the starting point is my audit team are there to check a box, to give me core assurance over almost financial risks, it's very hard to take them from there to how can I add value to you, where's the benefit to you in my audit team being aligned to your business objectives. So part of the journey that we've been on, particularly with the Co-operative Bank, is around building the expectations of the board and the audit committee about what they're going to get from internal audit, how they're going to get it. They need to be open to that change in approach. They need to buy into it, and they need to buy into the ability of the audit team to be able to deliver in that way. There's a bit about the recognition and trust in the audit team to have difficult conversations with the business, but also to communicate those effectively up into the audit committee and directly into board. And part of that is that audit team being seen to be embedded as part of the strategic planning process as well. So we knew that we had a degree of success within the bank at the moment when we were asked for our view and opinion on the strategic plan as it was being approved, not just in terms of other risks being managed, but of the process by which that plan was being put together. And that in itself drove pieces of audit assurance activity around underlying assumptions, management of risk appetite, and a number of different pieces there that fed up into that board reporting. And then as the plan progresses during the course of the year, course of the cycle, again, it's looking for how the audit committee are looking for input from internal audit. And that's similar in a number of ways to what the regulators are looking for from audit functions as well. So we increasingly see ourselves almost as a front runner for some of the areas of regulatory interest, and clearly in financial services over the last 10, 15 years, the regulator has a significant interest in strategy and the strategy of the business and the strategy of the business within the industry. And so because of that, they're looking for, with the relationship with internal audit, they're looking for us to have a view and to have an audit program that aligns to that strategy. So they see the relevance, and we don't go back to our pre-2007 views of where we're internal audit, when business strategies were going off in a number of different directions and weren't delivering what they should have been delivering. Why wasn't internal audit challenged more significantly at that point? And why didn't internal audit have something to say? And if nothing else, part of this process is around setting ourselves up for the Treasury Select Committee conversations and the regulator conversations around why didn't audit pick this stuff up and call it out more clearly. Lots of the rest of the presentation will talk a bit about this. The final box here is around the audit team, about how clearly the critical part of aligning business objectives, aligning the strategy of audit with the strategy of the business, is around the capability and capacity of the audit team. It's not something that can be just dropped onto an audit team and expect success. There are a number of processes that we've gone through to develop and empower our teams to have the right conversations with the organisation, but more importantly to understand what it is they're trying to achieve and to support them as they report what they're finding in a way that some of them find a little uncomfortable to start with. There's a bit of it here around training, there's a bit in here about the right recruitment, and the most value that we've been able to bring into this process is by using the audit team to bring people from the organisation in through work cycles, through rotations, to support this process, to build, again, part of building the credibility of the audit team to deliver this. I'm going to keep saying any questions as we go along. Any questions at this point? Everybody comfortable? Question at the back? Question at the back?
My question is, technically, the audit team will be reported to the board or the sub-board committees, right?
The audit team will report for us directly to the audit committee, yes.
And who appointing the audit team is the MD or the CEO, usually?
Who appoints the audit team is me. So the Chief Internal Auditor will appoint his audit team.
Okay, how we should mitigate the conflict of interest when the audit team reports to you as a CEO or MD, but technically,
I can hear you, it's okay.
It will be reported to the board or sub-board.
Just so I understand, so a conflict of interest in terms of the audit team reporting to the CEO.
Okay.
So from a structural point of view, audit team.
Yeah.
So the audit team report to me. I report directly to the chair of the audit committee, and part of my remit in internal audit covers all of the bank, including the CEO and his creation and execution of his business strategy. Where's the conflict from your perspective? Where's your reporting line?
The audit team appointed by the CEO.
By the chair of the audit committee. So a member of the board. My independence comes from direct reporting to a member of the board rather than to the CEO. But absolutely, and I think that's a fair challenge in terms of those building blocks. It's a lot easier when you've got that independence of reporting line. If the reporting line is from either the CEO, CFO, or General Counsel, it is a different hearts and minds conversation that you need to have to build the mandate for building your audit plan in that way. And that's part of the reason, particularly from a financial services point of view, that reporting line is so encouraged.
Okay. Thank you.
So question in the middle.
Hi,
hello.
My name is Klaus Andreasen, come from Swedbank. We are working with this and our whole audit plan is aligned to strategic objectives. We have some challenges that you might recognize in terms of timing. When you plan for next year's audit plan, these things will be on the agenda of the board and of senior management, but if you come out and you ask, okay, what have you done in terms of changing the organization? Have you hired new skills? Have you changed processes? Well, this is some, like wine, sometimes you have to put it in the cellar and take it up a couple of years later because it's not drinkable when it's on the board's agenda. Yeah. And then in terms of reporting, are you going directly to the board with these audits?
If I may, I'll come on to because I think I'll cover some of those, but hold the question and we may come back to it. Probably a good time to move across. So in terms of the building blocks for this process, and this is very much based on my experiences within the Co-operative Bank, but also where we've pushed this within Barclays and within the USS. And exactly to the point that you make, Klaus. The building block for this starts with training of the audit team. So there is a point that if you want to do this year, you needed to have started planning for it 2 years ago, and it doesn't happen quickly. So the first thing we've done, and we've spent a lot of time on, is having a core business objective for all of our auditors as they come in. So do they understand how the business works? So not just within their areas of core expertise. So our IT auditors spend as much time understanding credit risk and financial risks as they do in their deeper technical knowledge. Via lunch and learns, via training across the team, by bringing some of the big four co-source providers in to run training sessions, but for them to understand the broader, how does a bank work? What are the key drivers? What's really important? Because you need something to anchor the strategy to. And so there's a part of that's how does the business work? Part of it is what's your current environment like for your organisation? How does your organisation work at the moment? What are its challenges, strengths and weaknesses at the minute? Where are its real threats coming from? And again, that's got to be across all of the audit team, whether it's relevant to their current audit, whether it's relevant to anything that they've got in the plan at that point in time. They need to be aware of what are the hooks and warning signs that they will see as they complete their work that they need to snag onto, they need to pick up and bring into the centre to help with this process. And on top of that, the clear articulation of how the strategy works, what the strategy is, what are the department objectives, what are the business objectives. And this really works quite well in terms of shaking out discrepancies, because we all have conversations at a bank level which everybody will hear about. Stop hitting this in a minute. What are we trying to achieve? And then as those business auditors go out into their stakeholder meetings and do their business monitoring across the organisation, they hear different messages. They hear and see and feel areas which aren't aligned, where there are elements of fiefdoms and self-interest which are operating, if not against the strategy, but aren't fully aligned. And again, that they're useful, but without that wider understanding of the business strategy, it's really hard for them to pick those pieces up. Within that, and we're within the strategy, both at a business level and at a bank level, we're looking for what are the key metrics, what are the business indicators, what are the leading indicators, how do we know this is successful? I've seen it work really well more recently, where that is really clear in terms of the way the bank scorecard cascades down through the organisation. So as an audit team, there's always a bit of a scorecard aligned to the business, but it's really hard to make that real and live because we don't drive income. We have a limited amount of challenge on cost reduction. It's really hard to articulate value, but there are still some pieces that we can tag onto. But from a business perspective, the visibility of the cascade of bank strategic objectives down to individual department objectives is really useful for the team to understand how this cascades down, so they can challenge how it builds back up. And again, that's part of is this realistic and deliverable? And then this ongoing piece around, well, how are we performing? This isn't a once and done part of the annual process. This is what's the 5-year plan through to what's the annual plan through to how do we perform last month, or what are the key metrics, what needs to change as a result, how are we adjusting the plan as we go through it. All of the time, the audit team is sitting there thinking, so what does it mean to the work I'm doing at the moment? So if I know I have an audit of a particular area coming up, what do I need to think about now? How do I change my approach and make sure it's going to land, it's going to have the value it needs to have? And so that constant thinking about what does it mean for us is a challenge we bring into all of the key chunks of the audit process. So we think about this as part of annual planning, as we develop the audit universe, as we assess audit need, we think about what's important. So we rank and we change our ratings to have a weighting when we calculate our audit universe. I'm sure lots of you do something similar, so that if the business strategy is focused on growth, those elements of the audit universe that support that growth have a higher weighting, therefore drive a higher audit need through that planning process. It's a relatively simplistic way of doing it, but it's a way that we can talk the audit committee through why this has got a higher need than that. We talk about this through our audit delivery process. So for every audit that we pick up, we have a specific question in there about where's the relevance of this to the strategy. And it isn't always a straightforward, the only things we do are those things that are going to impact on the strategy, because we have a significant amount of core assurance, a number of varied stakeholders as well. So there are pieces of our work that won't immediately align, but they're part of having a stable functioning organisation. And finally, within our audit reporting, both individual audit reports, within our monthly reports up to our risk committee, our reports up to the CEO and reports into audit committee, we talk about what we have done, we talk about the value it's given, we talk about where we see misalignment, we pull themes together. And that's a big part of the work that we do here, is how do we as an audit team gather information from across the organisation, bring it back into the centre and drive out those themes that we can then report up, that we can then drive action. So we brought our specific mechanism for doing this is a monthly risk meeting we have within the audit function. And part of that, everybody before that meeting, they will cover all of the principal risks, they will cover all of the areas of the business that they're responsible for, and they will have this lens of business objectives as well as risk management, as well as key themes, and they come in and there will be individual isolated data points from that in that meeting that just through that 2-hour conversation will boil into, these are control themes, this is the focus of our monthly report, these are the things that we're seeing across the business that we feel need more attention, that aren't getting what they need. And that's part of that is not, you can't start that with that meeting, it has to start with an understanding of why they're doing it. We then embed or codify that work within our methodology, so we show how we're going to consider that strategy within the plan process, within the individual audit planning process, within our business monitoring. And we support that with the right tools and templates to drive conversations from a varied levels of experience across that audit team. So what are the key things they're looking for here? Is there clarity of understanding of objectives? Is there clarity of governance around the processes? Is there good risk management, risk culture through this? All the basics that we would be looking for anywhere, but we pull it together under the banner of how are we showing that we're aligned through this process. Next building block around delivery, again, a lot of this is around the moderation. It's my involvement, my heads of audits involvement through the process, through the individual audits, through the challenge to what we get back from the continuous business monitoring, just even through the work we do around issue assurance, because the issues that are being delivered now are ones that developed from audit reports 12, 18 months ago at times. And so it's, again, working with the business to challenge, is this still the right thing to do in this way? Is this still aligned to the business strategy? Is this investment to fix this audit issue the most strategic investment that you should be making at the moment at this point in time? And it's having the audit team aware of those conversations so that we don't get stuck in a rut of we're doing this because internal audit said to do it 18 months ago. Is it still the right thing to do? Are people really thinking about the outcomes of the work that they're doing? And finally, from a building blocks perspective, is really around the reporting that we deliver. So it is our opportunity to land messages, to demonstrate insight. So within the exec summaries of our reports, how do we show that we have considered the business objectives and the strategy and show the impact of our findings to that strategy? It becomes a lot more powerful as a piece of work if we can say, we found these 10 issues, and there's significant issues in any organisation, but this one issue, if you don't fix it, you're not going to hit this strategic objective, or you're going to struggle with this other element to it. Or particularly where you find disconnects and disjoints between the way businesses are operating, using the exec summary to bring out some of those messages. This would be an issue in its own right, but in the context of what the business is trying to do, this level of disconnect will stop and hamper the business operating the way it needs to. And that flows through to our work we do around risk culture as well, because a lot of this comes down to to the culture we see in the organisation, and being able to call that into our exec summaries as well helps with both landing a message but also driving the right themes for why things aren't working. And it's not just, in some cases it can come down to just a lack of understanding for what should be working. And that feedback loop back to the audit committee is really important. So part of the process for delivering this is about demonstrating credibility, about telling the audit committee, trust us, this is what we're going to do, this is why it's going to be valuable, but then coming back to that and saying, and we told you 12 months ago this is what we were going to do, and this is how it starts to flow through, and this is how it can improve, and this is where we need to do more. And that audit committee reporting is a really important part of embedding the process and embedding commitment to the process as we go through. So my main final slide was really just to talk around some of the lessons we've learned through this process, and some of the things that have worked and some of the things that haven't. Theoretical stumps I don't think is a genuine phrase, but we've made it up for the context purposes of this presentation. But this, for me, is around having stumps that we keep going back to explain the theory behind what we're doing. And it's starting, whether it's within the audit team, within the executive team, or within the board, anchors where we explain this is why we're doing what we're doing. It's about not assuming that there's any retained knowledge within a number of these, particularly the executive and the audit committee, any retained knowledge for why and how we're doing what we're doing. But keep coming back to this is what we said we were going to do, this is what we're doing, this is the value it's driving, this is why we're getting deeper and more valuable insights at the moment than we would have had if we hadn't been doing it in this way. And we find it's a really important way, when we stop doing this or when we haven't done this, we lose the message, we lose the context where we're trying to land some of these findings, some of these issues, back to okay, you then almost, it unravels back to where's my core assurance, why are you focusing in these areas? So reinforcing the message of why we're looking at where we're looking at. Be realistic is very much, to Klaus' point earlier, this is not something that can be taken out of the cellar and drunk straight away. It's about, you will have small wins early on if you do this right, but it takes time to really build a consistent capability and a consistent message and a fertile ground in which to land the message. Where shadow business objectives, where I've seen this fall apart or become more difficult is where there isn't consistency over business objectives, where there are plan A versus plan B challenges within the organisation, even within the board of an organisation. And that's where, again, this works really well if those are really well understood, because then you can start having better conversations with the board around at what point your plan A and plan B activity becomes counterproductive, at what point you lose the option to have both plan A and plan B. Because if you understand them, and with discretion, if your audit team understand both those, you can then have sensible conversations with the audit committee and with the executive about what the consequences are of some of the issues that you're seeing. Flexibility. If you put your audit plan together on January the 1st and you expect it to be the plan you deliver December the 31st, then you're, in this environment, kidding yourself. You need to be able to constantly make judgments both within individual audits and within the overall audit plan. You need to be brave as part of that process to tell the audit committee 30% of this plan isn't the right thing to do now. It's not the highest and best use of my resources at the moment. I need to bring other pieces of work in which are more focused, more aligned, and this will have some consequences around some areas of core assurance, but it's that flexibility that allows you to never get to the point you're delivering an audit report that nobody cares about and you don't care about because you know it's not the one that you need to deliver at that point in time. And then that leads into judgment. Part of this is around judgment from the audit team in terms of where to go, what to follow, but also judgment from me and my heads of audit around what are the right things to do, what are the right meetings to go to, how do you spread our resource in the right way to really add value, because we're not a huge audit function in the context of the business, and I'm sure everybody has the same challenge in terms of how you cover activity from soup to nuts that the organisation are involved in, but really focusing on those things that have the most impact to the organisation achieving its business objectives. Because if we come back to the why bother question, it's about making the business better. It's about demonstrating that the audit function are there to hold management to account in delivery of those strategic objectives, not just to provide the core assurance underpinning the business. My recap, I think I've covered, has gone through. There are a number of different points to this process. We need clarity over the environment you're working in. You need a really clear starting point in terms of the capability of your team and the capability of the business to work in this way. You need to invest time in training, particularly in terms of the business and the business environment and the wider business environment. You need to document your methodology effectively. You need to be able to demonstrate to the team how to do this consistently without it becoming a bureaucratic, administrative nightmare, but really focusing on the points of insight, points of value you can bring out. You need to really get messages across effectively, so that reporting from every output from the audit function has to be consistent and aligned with this approach, because otherwise you lose the momentum. What we're aiming for is a build-up of audit reporting from individual audits to risk reporting into our audit committee reporting and ultimately our annual control opinion, which comes from a consistent point, which is all aligned to how the business is operating. And moderation in terms of those monthly meetings, those weekly catch-ups, those audit catch-ups that moderate to make sure everybody is aligned and everybody is looking at things consistently, but also to identify the areas of misalignment. That, for me, has driven into better quality reports, better insight, and a better ability to demonstrate value add. So, can we decide? Any questions?
Is it on? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, you said you use co-sourcing, that you take people in, like guest auditors, or
yeah.
How does that work? What are the skills you're looking for?
So there's a couple of parts to that. So in general, we would have an approach where we starting from a skills matrix, looking at what the organisation looks like and what the skills of the audit team are and where we can fill some of those gaps. We use guest auditors and rotation and people from the organisation more to bring commercial pragmatism into some of the audit work, to help the audit team understand the impact of the work they're doing, and to better understand how the business itself operates. We use CoSource both to provide training, but then also to supplement some of our audit work to bring subject matter expertise and benchmarking and industry-wide views into that audit work. And then we do what we can to try to suck the knowledge out of that expensive co-source and improve the core skills of the audit team as we go along. So it's really using that where we can to adapt the audit team to the changing environment, but also to constantly look to bolster the audit skills by bringing in some business skills. Majority of the auditors we bring in fresh and external certainly haven't worked in our bank. A number of them won't have worked in UK banking before, and so we really need to supplement that to get a balance across the audit team. Does that help? Yep. Okay. Question over that side. Have you got the microphone? Just over here.
Just had two questions.
Sure.
Just coming back to earlier on, you talked about adjusting your scoring to
Yes.
take care into the business areas that you think are important. I was just curious to know that, does it mean when you're building your audit plan, you're basing it on inherent risk? Because presumably these things, you haven't had chance to look at them, so you're just saying we know this is important,
Yeah.
then we want to have a chance to look at them more often. So that's my first question. The second, if I may just throw it in there, is also looking into the reporting. When you talked about you go back to the audit committee, this is what we had promised to do, this is what we did, etc., etc. Does that mean you've got a one-off report that you do to cover that aspect? And do you do it at the same time when you're having your plan being approved?
So, first question first. So, in terms of our planning process, we start with inherent risk. I'm sure most people do. We break our business up into its very relative auditable entities, and we'll assess it via inherent risk. Within that inherent risk, that's where we bring our weightings in terms of which of those risks and which of the processes have the highest correlation to what's important to the organisation. So in growth phase, we may spend more focus on credit risk. In a downturn in the environment, we may spend more focus on, from our point at the moment, capital and liquidity risks. And so we'll look at which of those business processes have the highest impact on the inherent risk in those areas. And that then drives a bit more colour into our audit universe. And then we will then apply, control environment, and which brings out our residualness and what we would drive out our audit needs. So where does that inherent risk impacted by the weighting multiplied by our process control environment view will drive out which of the areas we really need to focus on this year. So but part of that does bring in when did you last audit it, what do you know about the area already, how stable is the area, what are other people saying about that area. So they all feed into the process. It's not just a straightforward, that's relevant, that's what we have to do. In terms of reporting, we report quarterly to the audit committee. In each of those, there's both the written report of this is the control environment that we see at the moment, based on our audit work and based on the work that we're doing, continuous business monitoring, and it's there that we have the verbal overlay around this is why we're looking at it in this way, this is how our alignment to business strategy is driving this audit plan. It's the conversation rather than the re-emphasis in the documentation. We then support that. So as part of our plan this year, we've talked the audit committee through, when you get your control opinion at the end of the year, this is the process that we'll have gone through to give you that control opinion, and that then breaks it down to this is how we see the business, this is how we've joined the business together and looked at groupings, this is how we've considered execution of strategy within that, in the same way as we consider culture, risk management and other things. And that then, we've continually talked them through, when you get control opinion, this is what it's going to look like and this is what it's based on. Any other questions? No? Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. More questions is good. I can't believe how well spread out everyone is in this room. Could have just filled this table.
According to your experience, to what extent to internal policies and business model and workflows, all these issues will be helpful for the audit team?
Helpful in
their functions.
Helpful to the audit team in delivering its role, or helpful to the audit team in this alignment piece? So I'm not really misunderstanding you.
I mean, if we have a good team, an audit team, to what extent do we need great policies, business models, all these issues internally?
Within the audit team?
Yes.
So I don't think they're the most important part of doing this effectively. So I think you need enough to be able to demonstrate that there's a consistent approach. You need enough to demonstrate there's some rigour in the challenge you provide to it. I wouldn't overly focus on the development of the model and the process. It's more around the mindset, and that's why for me the quality comes from the conversation that we have when we're all together, rather than individual execution or even the small team execution of individual pieces of work. There's one of the things it's impossible to put a percentage on, but it's less than 50% of the value of my audit team comes from the individual audits that they do. There's more of it comes from the business monitoring, the business engagement that feeds into our wider reporting. And that feeds in a little bit to that point, which is you can build a fantastic methodology, but unless your auditors think and communicate effectively, you lose that value. It's okay.
Can I just add, it was a comment to that, because I realize now that perhaps one of our main mistakes why we're not as successful as we can be is we have been looking at these strategies as change. So we have had external regulatory tsunami and then all of the organizational changes within, and then we're coming from an emerging risk perspective, and then we're coming too early. We should be focusing on the inherent risk of the strategic exercise and driving the bank in the right direction. And so thank you for that.
I think that's right, and I think one of the first things we did was to have a strategy 5 years ago, and up to now. It's almost the expectation you either have a strategic plan auditable entity or a strategic audit on the plan, and nobody ever wants that audit because they're really hard to deliver, and you end up almost doing a governance of the strategy process audit rather than a underpinning what needs to be successful. So I think that's fair. Oh.
From your experience over the years, do you think there was a positive move in the expectations of the audit committee members?
I think it's still evolving. I think and for me 2007 was the mind shift change, and I think as members of audit committees that have more experience in business post 2007 become members of those audit committees, I think they bring that openness to audit and challenge with them. I think we still see legacy members of boards and audit committees that have legacy views in terms of the role of audit and the value of audit in that process. So really, with those building blocks, the executive and the audit committee are really critical in terms of that environment, because they have to be open to it, and the starting point for a number is of that same stereotypical perception of the internal audit function and what that function can do. So I think we're seeing some of it, and I've seen some great examples where you get good conversations at audit committee that support what we're trying to do, but you still feel, it comes back to why the theoretical stumps is such a key part of it. You still feel that if there are some people that you don't re-emphasise each time what you're doing, why you're doing it, it all starts to unravel back again, and you have to build it back up.
When you're talking about alignment with the business, I just wondered, to what extent do you align with the second line of defense? To what extent do you depend on some of the stuff they are doing in building your own plan?
So from my experience, the assurance activity of the second line is behind what we're trying to do here. They're still very much focused on single topics. The senior leadership within risk have a role to play as part of the business in this, in terms of their risk assessment of that strategic plan and their risk management through that plan. So as much of this is an assessment of whether the risk management strategy is aligned to the strategic plan and strategic objectives of the organisation. So in some cases they're as much a customer rather than a colleague through the audit work. But then when we get on to the assurance activity and combined assurance, there is some value that we're trying to drive and we're trying to improve, but that's more broadly across where we can place reliance, where we can pull themes from the work that both first and second line assurance are completing, into the work that we do, into our worldview. So we're not averse to, within our reporting, talk around recent findings within first and second line work without having to spend a huge amount of time on that work. It's another input into our process. It's not one that we would place huge amounts of assurance on if it's green, but if we're seeing themes across those lines and they're relevant to business strategy, we'll incorporate them into our reporting. Of course you can, yes.
Okay, so one of your building blocks was, for me, one of the most important ones because it's the foundation of all the other building blocks, training.
Yes.
You said that it takes probably 2 years to stabilize all the internal audit team. How big is your audit team?
20.
Okay. Do you specialize them in every single type of audit you have, or you have a group of auditors that will do, for example, credit audits?
Yeah, so we have specialisms within the team. We have a core banking team, we have an IT specialist team, we have a financial prudential risk team, and then within there they have specific specialisms.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Any other questions?
We're good?
Thank you very much for your time.
Very good. Thank you.